All right, so you've handed us this pretty dense book, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, and we're going to try to break it down for you today, see if we can extract some key insights without, getting too lost in the weeds.
Yeah, we're going to really take a deep dive into this one. Essentially, the book is about this journey towards awakening, transcending what it calls the egoic state of mind. And it covers a lot, like the history of life itself, the evolution of consciousness, and also a lot about our actions in the world, like awakened doing and the workings of the ego, plus the pain body, finding your true self, and then ultimately the possibility of this new earth. So there's a lot to cover.
There is. Our mission today is to really grasp the core ideas in this book, specifically around, ego, consciousness, and this whole new earth concept, and then try to see how those can offer some surprising fresh perspectives on your everyday life and the world at large. So let's jump right in. Let's start with the ego, because the book describes it pretty bluntly, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it really doesn't mince words. One of the most striking claims is that human history, in a way, is just a series of collective manifestations of insanity.
Wow, that's pretty harsh.
Right. And it argues that these are driven by, those basic human things, fear, greed, and the desire for power.
Yeah, that definitely tracks. But he's not just talking about wars and stuff, right? He's saying this plays out in our own lives, personally.
Oh, absolutely. It's in our personal relationships too. These same forces, fear, greed, that need to control, they're often at the root of all the conflict we experience personally. They can, distort the way we see ourselves, the way we see other people, and then lead to actions and interpretations that, don't really serve us in the long run.
So basically the book is saying that humanity has some serious issues.
Yeah. If we were to, analyze humanity as if it were a single person, Tolle says the diagnosis would probably be something like, chronic paranoid delusions with a lot of violence and cruelty directed at perceived enemies.
That's a heavy thought. And the thing is, we're often not even aware of this, right? Tolle talks about how easily we get trapped by our own words and thoughts.
Yeah, it's almost like they have this kind of hypnotic effect on us. We think that just because we can name something, we actually understand it.
Right.
But all we've done is just slap a label on it. We haven't really grappled with the incredible depth of everything: a bird, a tree, a stone, even another person.
It's true. We stop at the label and think, oh, okay, I get it now. And he has that really striking image in the book about the woman on the train, the one having the argument in her head.
Right. She's totally lost in this imaginary argument, super intense, and continues it even after she gets off the train, just walking down the street. And he points out that this kind of constant, unaware thinking is the main dilemma of human existence.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much of our mental energy is just going towards, these pointless internal arguments. And Tolle talks about a couple of experiences he had that kind of started to shake his faith in pure intellect.
Yeah, these moments that made him question whether, intellect was the be-all and end-all. He talks about this one time when he was in a men's room, and he suddenly just bursts out laughing for no reason. It was this moment of detachment from his usual mental chatter. And then there was this suicide of a professor he knew, this highly respected academic. And it just made him realize that, having all that knowledge didn't necessarily make you happy or fulfilled.
So we're starting to see this ego as this force that's driven by fear, constantly labeling and thinking, often without us even realizing it. But then Tolle takes it further and talks about how we start identifying with external things, with form itself.
Right. We construct our identity by identifying with forms, and especially our possessions.
Yeah, the stuff we own.
Right. And the book argues that this is largely fueled by, cultural delusions that basically tell us that our self-worth is somehow tied to what we own. So we look to those things to define who we are.
It's funny how much advertising plays on that, right? Buy this and you'll be happy.
Totally. But what's interesting is that the book says that this attachment to things kind of loosens its grip when we stop seeking our identity in them. The key is to be aware of our attachments, especially when we're faced with the possibility of losing something. So if you get really upset when you lose something you own, that's a sign that you're identifying with it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's not just possessions, is it? It's our bodies, too. We get so attached to how we look.
Totally. Identifying with the physical body, our appearance, strength, abilities is another big way the ego operates. And this inevitably leads to suffering because, all these physical attributes are temporary. They change, they fade. Think about aging. How many people struggle with the changes their bodies go through if they get older?
He has that really powerful example in the book about the young woman with anorexia. It's kind of disturbing, but it really makes the point.
Yeah, that's a really striking example. This young woman, she's dangerously thin, but in her mind, she sees herself as overweight. So it's like this extreme example of mind identification where the mental concept of my body completely overrides the actual physical reality.
So not identifying with the body doesn't mean neglecting it, right? It just means we appreciate it without letting it define us.
Exactly. Like you can still enjoy your body's vitality, take care of it, but your sense of self remains independent of its constantly changing form. It's like enjoying a dance without believing that you are the dancer's body.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And he also talks about how, a significant loss can actually be a kind of awakening, but sometimes it just leads to the ego finding a new form to cling to.
Yeah, he makes this point that loss can create an opening for awakening, that kind of disidentification from the forms we've been holding on to. But oftentimes, the ego just finds a new form to attach to, like maybe a victim identity with all the associated emotions.
Right. Poor me.
Exactly. The ego would rather have any identity than no identity at all. And then he talks about how dangerous it is to cling to thought systems as absolute truth. He has that really chilling example about Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge leader.
Oh, yeah, that was intense.
So Pol Pot had this rigid Marxist interpretation of history, and it led him to order the execution of anyone who was deemed an intellectual just for wearing glasses.
Oh.
Like that's how extreme it can get when you believe your thoughts are the absolute truth.
It's kind of terrifying to think about how many conflicts throughout history have been fueled by that kind of thinking. And he talks about religion too, right? How organized religion can sometimes fall into that trap.
Yeah, he acknowledges the concern within many religions about relativism, the idea that there's no single absolute truth. But he emphasizes that ultimate truth can't be found in doctrines, ideologies, or sets of rules. All of those are ultimately just constructs of thought. Thought can point us towards truth, but it's never the whole picture.
Like that Buddhist analogy, right? The finger pointing at the moon.
Exactly. The finger isn't the moon itself. So we have this ego that clings to forms and thoughts as if they were the absolute truth. And then there's this constant tension between our desire for peace and the ego's need for drama.
It feels like those two are always battling it out inside us.
Yeah, like this constant inner conflict. The book encourages us to ask ourselves, what do we truly want, peace or to be right? Because even though we all yearn for peace, there's a part of us, that egoic part, that thrives on drama and conflict. It's how it reinforces its sense of identity.
It's so hard to catch yourself doing that, though, isn't it?
It is. It takes practice. But try to pay attention to those moments when you feel triggered, like when someone criticizes you or disagrees with you. You can often feel that surge of energy, that need to defend yourself, prove you're right. That's usually the ego in action.
And he talks about how this need for drama shows up in our relationships, too, with this whole concept of role-playing.
Right, especially in romantic relationships. We often engage in role-playing, especially in the early stages. Like, we present the version of ourselves we think the other person wants to see, hoping they'll do the same for us.
It's like a game, almost.
Exactly. But those roles are unsustainable, and eventually they start to slip. Then the underlying ego, with all its needs and insecurities, gets exposed, and that's when the real trouble starts.
And even falling in love, he says, isn't always what we think it is.
Yeah, he has this interesting perspective on falling in love. He suggests that it's often just an intensification of egoic wanting and needing, like an addiction to this idealized image of another person.
It's more about, I want you than I love you.
Exactly. And he points out that even the Spanish language kind of blurs that distinction, because they use the same verb, te quiero, for both.
Huh, interesting. And then he talks about how all these pre-existing social roles that we take on can also become part of our ego identity.
Right, like the middle-class housewife, the tough macho male, the rebellious artist, even just the role of adult.
Oh, yeah, the adult thing.
Like we have to be all serious and responsible all the time. These roles can really stifle our spontaneity and joy.
They make us act inauthentically. It's like we're always performing instead of just being ourselves. So basically, the ego is always searching for something outside of us to define who we are and to create drama. And even our pursuit of happiness, he says, can become a problem.
Yeah, he has this kind of counterintuitive perspective on happiness. He says that chasing after it directly is often a dead end because it implies that you don't already have it. Instead, we should focus on freeing ourselves from unhappiness by fully accepting what is present in this moment. True happiness, he argues, is our natural state. It's already there, just obscured by all the unhappiness.
So it's about letting go of all that resistance.
Exactly. And he goes on to talk about how this all plays out in the parent-child relationship, which is obviously a really important one.
Yeah, what's the ego's role there?
Well, he makes this distinction between the practical function of being a parent, like providing care and guidance, and identifying with the role of parent as part of your ego identity. Because when it becomes an ego identification, it can lead to all sorts of unhealthy behaviors, overprotectiveness, control, spoiling the child, all driven by the parent's own unconscious needs and fears.
So it's about being aware of those tendencies, right? Catching yourself when you're acting out of your own ego.
Precisely. Awareness is key. And that applies to recognizing these patterns in our own parents, too, without judgment or blame. Just noticing them can be a huge step towards breaking free from those cycles.
But then, kind of as a counterpoint to all this ego stuff, Tolle offers a really beautiful definition of love.
Right. He defines love as the recognition of oneness, that underlying unity beneath all the apparent duality in the world.
So it's not about needing or wanting something from the other person.
No, it's about seeing the other person as an extension of yourself, recognizing that same being within them. He calls it the birth of God into the world of form. And it's something that makes the world feel less dense, more transparent, you know?
Yeah, I get that. But even when we're not in the midst of some big drama, the ego can still be working in these more subtle ways, right? Like what he calls background unhappiness.
Yeah, he points out that there are these subtle forms of negativity that we often just accept as normal: impatience, irritation, nervousness, that general feeling of being fed up. And he calls this background unhappiness. It's kind of like the ego's default setting.
So we need to be even more alert to notice these subtle forms of negativity because they can be just as draining as the big dramatic stuff.
Absolutely. And when this background unhappiness gets amplified on a collective level, it can manifest as widespread paranoia and fear, leading to some pretty dark periods in history.
Like the examples he gives, the Spanish Inquisition, the World Wars.
Right. Those are all prime examples of collective ego gone haywire. It's that us versus them mentality taken to the extreme.
And he talks about how this underlying feeling of not enough that the ego carries can really mess with our ability to be happy for other people's successes.
Yeah, because the ego is always operating from this place of scarcity. So when we see someone else succeeding, it can trigger feelings of resentment or envy, like their gain is somehow our loss.
Like a zero-sum game.
Right. But the irony is that very resentment actually blocks us from attracting success ourselves. Because true success requires an open heart and a willingness to celebrate abundance wherever it appears.
It's like cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Exactly. And he even explores how the ego can play a role in illness, which is something you might not expect.
How so?
Well, he says that illness can either strengthen the ego or weaken it. Like if you're constantly complaining, wallowing in self-pity, and identifying strongly with your disease, that's the ego getting a boost.
Yeah, I'm a cancer patient or whatever.
Right. But on the other hand, illness can sometimes create an opening for gentleness, self-compassion, and deeper insights. So it can actually weaken the ego as your energy shifts away from mental drama and towards healing.
So it's all about how you choose to relate to the experience.
Exactly. And then he talks about how the ego tries to escape its own sense of inadequacy by merging with larger groups.
Oh yeah, the collective ego.
Right. So the individual ego, feeling incomplete and unhappy, tries to find a sense of belonging and purpose by identifying with groups, nations, political parties, religions.
It's like a way of feeling bigger than yourself.
Exactly. But the problem is, the collective ego often exhibits the same negative traits as the individual ego. It still needs conflict. It still needs to be right. And it still creates those us versus them divisions. So it doesn't really solve the problem. It just shifts it to a larger scale.
It's just trading one ego for another.
Right. And then he makes a really interesting distinction between the body's intelligence and our emotions.
Oh yeah, I remember that part.
So he talks about how the body has this inherent intelligence that governs all our automatic functions: breathing, digestion, healing, all that. But then there are emotions, which are basically the body's reactions to our thoughts.
It's like our thoughts create a physical response.
Exactly. And the problem is, the body can't really distinguish between a real threat and a thought. So if you're constantly thinking anxious thoughts, your body's going to react as if you're in actual danger, releasing stress hormones and creating all kinds of tension.
So it's like we're constantly triggering our own stress response just with our thoughts, and then he contrasts these ego-driven emotions with deeper states of being.
Right. He says the ego-driven emotions are usually based on external things that are constantly changing. But then there are these deeper states of being, love, joy, peace, that come from within and aren't dependent on anything outside of ourselves.
It's like the difference between fleeting happiness and lasting contentment.
Exactly. And he gives that great analogy about ducks flapping their wings after a fight.
I love that analogy.
It's such a perfect image of how to release negative energy naturally. The ducks don't hold on to the anger or resentment. They just let it go.
And then we come to this really key concept, the pain body.
Yeah, the pain body is basically this accumulation of past emotional pain that lives inside us. It's like a shadow self that feeds on negativity.
And it can be pretty active, right? It's not just sitting there passively.
No, it seeks to become active, to feed on negativity, both in ourselves and in others. You have these dormant and active phases. So when it's active, you might find yourself drawn to unhappy situations or even creating them unconsciously.
It's almost like it has a will of its own. And Tolle makes this interesting observation that people with heavy pain bodies might actually be more motivated to awaken.
Yeah, because their suffering eventually becomes so unbearable that they're forced to look for a way out. It's like the pain body becomes a catalyst for spiritual growth. And he shares some really powerful stories about witnessing the pain body in action and how just being present can help to dissolve it.
Like the one about the guy in the restaurant having that outburst.
Right. And then there's the story about Ethel, who is so anxious about her legal issues, but then she meets this person who just radiates calmness and presence, and her anxiety just melts away.
It's amazing how powerful presence can be.
Absolutely. And Tolle emphasizes that our childhood experiences, especially any trauma or neglect, can really shape the nature of our pain body.
So if you had a difficult childhood, you might have a more easily triggered pain body.
Exactly. But the good news is, presence is like an antidote. The more present you are, the less power the pain body has over you.
So it's all about cultivating awareness. And now we get to the really crucial part, finding our true self, the essence that lies beyond all these fleeting forms.
And this is where that ancient inscription, know thyself, comes in. Tolle says it's not just some philosophical ideal, but the most fundamental question we can ask ourselves.
Because it's not enough to just know about ourselves, right? Like our history, our personality traits.
Right. He makes that distinction between knowing about yourself and knowing yourself. Like you can know all about your past, your psychology, but that's not the same as knowing your true essence, the I am, that exists beyond all those mental constructs.
And he gives that example of the person who understands spirituality intellectually, but still reacts with anger and frustration when things go wrong.
Yeah, that's a common trap. We can have all the right ideas, but if we're still identifying with our ego in those challenging moments, then we haven't truly integrated those ideas. So the path forward is to choose peace over those automatic reactions, to respond from a place of awareness rather than from that limited sense of self.
It's about being present in the moment rather than getting lost in our thoughts and stories.
Exactly. And the present moment is absolutely key because the ego can't exist in the now. It needs the past and the future to survive.
It needs its stories and its anxieties.
Right. So when we fully embrace the present moment, the ego's grip starts to loosen. And Tolle highlights this paradox about the ego's unhappiness. It's unhappy when it doesn't get what it wants, and it's also unhappy when it does get what it wants because the satisfaction is always fleeting.
It's like it's designed to be unhappy.
In a way, it is. But when we step out of that egoic identification, we can start to see the impermanence of everything, our possessions, our bodies, our thoughts, even our egos themselves. It's all just a passing show.
And our purpose, according to Tolle, is to awaken to this truth while we're still in the midst of this dream of form.
Right, to awaken within the dream. And as we awaken, the drama and suffering start to lose their grip, and a new reality starts to emerge, which he calls the new earth.
So it's not about escaping from the world of form, but about transforming our relationship to it.
Exactly. We can still engage with the world, pursue our goals and passions, but we do it from a different place, a place of presence and awareness. And he uses Stephen Hawking as a great example of this.
Yeah, despite his physical limitations, Hawking had such a powerful presence.
Right. His consciousness shone through, even though his body was severely restricted. And his famous quote, "Who could have wished for more?" really speaks to that deep inner contentment that's independent of external circumstances.
It's really inspiring.
And Tolle also draws on these ancient wisdom traditions like the Upanishads to explain this idea of an essence that exists beyond all forms.
Oh yeah, the Brahman concept.
Right. Brahman is described as that which enables us to see, hear, and think, but it can't be seen, heard, or thought itself. So it's pointing to this underlying consciousness that's prior to all experience.
And he says that humanity's collective disease is basically that we've forgotten this truth. We've become so engrossed in the world of form that we've lost touch with our true nature.
Exactly. We're so caught up in time, in the constant stream of events, that we've forgotten about eternity. And that simple anecdote about the Chinese character for Buddha really captures this idea.
I love that one.
It's so elegant. The character is a combination of man and no, meaning that your true self is not found in any form.
It's about transcending all those labels and limitations.
Exactly. And then he ties it all together by talking about non-resistance, non-judgment, and non-attachment as key practices for living an awakened life.
Like that saying, this too shall pass.
Right. It's about recognizing the impermanence of everything and not getting so attached to outcomes. And this brings us to the distinction he makes between object consciousness and space consciousness.
Okay, yeah, that's a really important one.
So object consciousness is when our awareness is completely consumed by the material world and our thoughts. It's like we're constantly bombarded with stimuli, and it creates a lot of stress and anxiety. But space consciousness is about accessing that deeper dimension within ourselves, that sense of spaciousness and peace that's always there beneath the surface.
It's like shifting from a cluttered mind to a clear sky.
Exactly. And he says that when we get upset, it's not actually the external event that's causing the upset, but our loss of perspective. We've gotten so identified with the object level that we've forgotten about that underlying spaciousness.
So remembering that this too shall pass can help us reconnect with that space.
Exactly. It reminds us that everything is temporary and that we don't need to get so caught up in the drama.
And he even gives us a little practice to help us experience that inner space.
Right, the I am practice. Just consciously say or think I am without adding any of the words or descriptions. And then just notice the stillness that arises.
It's such a simple practice, but it can be really powerful.
It is. It helps us connect with that pure beingness that's prior to all our thoughts and labels. And he tells that great Zen story about the master and the disciple hearing the mountain stream.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It illustrates that shift from object consciousness to space consciousness, from mental chatter to pure present moment awareness.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, who is the experiencer of all this?
Yeah, who's the one who's aware of all these thoughts and feelings?
Right. And he says that all those things we usually identify with, our name, our job, our personality, those are all objects of experience. They're not the experiencer itself. The experiencer is that underlying awareness, that space of consciousness that's always present. And the biggest obstacle to realizing this is our tendency to get completely lost in the content of our experience, to get swept away by every thought and emotion.
So it's about cultivating that witness consciousness, that ability to observe without getting identified.
Exactly.
Right.
And even though we can't fully grasp consciousness intellectually, we can become conscious of it as our own presence.
That's so cool. And finally, he talks about the relationship between inner purpose and outer purpose.
Right. Inner purpose is about awakening, about being present. Outer purpose is what you do in the world, your work, your relationships. But inner purpose is primary. It's the foundation.
Because without inner alignment, all those outer achievements will ultimately feel empty.
Exactly. And for those who are wondering how to find their outer purpose, he suggests that it often emerges organically as we awaken.
Like, we might need to let go of some things that no longer resonate before we can discover what truly aligns with our soul.
Right. And this all leads to his vision of the return movement and the new earth.
So what is the return movement?
It's basically the natural weakening of form that happens as we age, get sick, or experience loss. These are often seen as negative things in our culture, but Tolle suggests that they actually hold a lot of potential for spiritual awakening.
Because they force us to let go of our attachment.
Exactly. And he contrasts this with how ancient cultures revered their elders for their wisdom.
Yeah, it's interesting how we've lost that reverence in our modern society.
We have. And then there's awakened doing, which he describes as the outer expression of this new consciousness.
So it's about bringing that presence and awareness into our actions in the world.
Exactly. And the new earth isn't some far-off utopia. It's something that's happening right now within each of us.
It's not a destination, it's a state of being.
Exactly. He quotes the Bible, "Behold, I make all things new." And he points out that the new heaven and the new earth are actually two sides of the same coin. The outer transformation is a reflection of the inner transformation.
So it's all about awakening to that new heaven within ourselves.
Precisely. And as more and more people do that, the new earth will naturally manifest in the outer world.
Wow, that's a really beautiful vision. So to sum up this deep dive into a new earth, we've explored the illusory nature of the ego, the importance of being present, the difference between form and consciousness, and this amazing possibility of awakening to a new reality, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
Yeah, and we really hope this has given you some food for thought, some new perspectives to consider without overwhelming you with too much information.
We want to leave you with a final quote and to ponder. In the coming days, try to notice your own thoughts and the things you identify with. Notice that voice in your head and see if you can catch yourself identifying with those fleeting forms. What happens when you just observe it all without judgment?
That's the real key, just noticing without getting caught up in the drama.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring these ideas and see how they can transform your life.